If the man who publicly shamed his pregnant wife had no idea she could destroy his career with a single secret, then who was truly powerless in that ballroom? The woman carrying new life, or the man blinded by his own ego? You could hear the laughter before you even saw the lights. The Grand Regent Hotel was alive that night. Music, clinking glasses, 1,000 glittering strangers, all gathered under a crystal chandelier so big it could swallow the moon. But the real spectacle wasn't the music, or the dresses, or even the sea of champagne. It was a moment that would haunt everyone who witnessed it, replayed over and over in a million whispered conversations for months to come. The moment began with a single, cold sentence that sliced through the ballroom air sharper than any knife. "Who'd want a pregnant woman?" The voice was male, loud enough to hush every nearby conversation. Guests froze, mid-laugh and mid-toast, their faces turning as one to the source of the drama. At the center of the marble floor, beneath the cold glare of the chandelier, stood a man in a $1,000 tuxedo. Grant Benson, all smug smile and Hollywood jaw, holding court like a self-crowned king. His hand was curled around a crystal glass, and his other arm, as if in a cruel joke, was draped around a woman who was most definitely not his wife. She was younger, statuesque, a red dress painted across her body, eyes bright with something between triumph and cruelty. But no one was looking at her. All eyes had swiveled to the doorway, where a woman, very pregnant, cheeks flushed with a mix of shame and outrage, stood stock still, her delicate hand pressed against her belly, as if holding herself together. She was dressed in simple elegance, hair swept into a knot, eyes shimmering but unbroken. This was Lila Hart. Everyone knew her, or at least they thought they did. She was Grant's wife, the one he'd paraded at charity events, spoken about in interviews, the one the society pages called the heart of the Benson family. For years, she'd been the quiet, smiling presence at Grant's side, the one who made their penthouse seem like a home, and not just another luxury investment. But tonight, she was no one's afterthought. Tonight, she was the center of the world. You could feel the hush ripple out from where she stood, could almost hear the collective intake of breath. Some people thought she might turn and run. Others expected tears, a collapse, a faint. But Lila did not move, not even when Grant's new girlfriend, a woman who'd never once tasted heartbreak, let out a brittle laugh that shattered the silence even further. It should have been a celebration. The annual City Hope Gala was the night the entire city turned out. Politicians, CEOs, old money, new influencers, and cameras everywhere. Lila had arrived alone, walking slowly, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. She wore pale blue silk, understated but elegant. It had been a hard pregnancy, months of doctor's appointments, worry, and sleepless nights. Still, she told herself, tonight, you'll smile. Tonight, you'll support Grant. He needs you. She never expected this. Grant's words echoed, impossible to ignore. Who'd want a pregnant woman? Seriously, Lila, look at yourself. This isn't the time or the place. Go home. I'm moving on. His date's lips curled, and some of the onlookers stifled nervous giggles. The humiliation was raw, public, and brutal. Lila's eyes met Grant's, searching for some sign. Remorse, shame, regret. There was nothing but indifference. She realized then, the man she'd loved no longer existed. In his place was a stranger, one who delighted in her pain. But humiliation wasn't the only thing in Lila's eyes. If you looked closely, you'd see something else flickering beneath the surface. Not just heartbreak, but a dangerous, steady resolve. Because Lila Hart was not just any pregnant wife. She was a woman with secrets and power that Grant Benson had never bothered to understand. He'd forgotten who she really was. For years, Lila had played the part he wanted. She'd given up her own career, pushed aside her ambitions, and shrunk herself to fit inside Grant's shadow. She'd endured the late nights, the whispered rumors, the dismissive jokes about little wives and women's work. She'd even convinced herself that this baby would save them, that it would bring them together again. But now, as her humiliation filled the grandest ballroom in the city, something inside her shifted. The pain was still there, raw and consuming, but it was joined by something else, a fierce, almost blinding clarity. For the first time, she saw Grant not as her husband, but as her enemy. He had made his choice, and so would she. Lila's mind spun back to the days before she met Grant, her own last name, the legacy she'd locked away, the billions that her grandfather's empire had quietly accumulated. For years, she'd kept that part of her life hidden. She wanted someone who would love her for who she was, not what she owned. But the time for hiding was over. She would not walk away defeated, not tonight, not ever. The silence in the ballroom became unbearable, stretched taut as a wire. Grant, oblivious, turned back to his mistress, raising his glass as if he'd scored a victory. But he didn't notice the glances exchanged among the guests, the ones who remembered Lila's maiden name, the way her eyes seemed to harden into steel. And then, just as Lila's heart threatened to break, someone stepped from the crowd. A tall, sharply dressed man, radiating quiet confidence and unmistakable power, walked straight to Lila's side. For a moment, no one recognized him. Then the whispers began. "That's Adrian Westfield, the billionaire." "Why is he here, with her?" He offered Lila his arm. "Ready to show them who you really are." Lila nodded once, chin high, and took his hand. In that instant, the narrative shifted. Lila was no longer the abandoned, humiliated wife. She was something much more dangerous, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. And as they strode past Grant, whose smug confidence faltered for the first time that night, you could almost hear the beginning of a legend. Tonight, the story was just getting started. For most people in that ballroom, Lila Hart had always been an afterthought. She was the kind of woman people described as nice or quiet. A woman who never raised her voice, never made a scene, never wore anything flashy enough to make the society pages. She was polite, careful, the kind of person who apologized when someone else bumped into her. For years, that's exactly how she wanted it. Fading into the background felt safe, especially in a city where being seen could mean being judged, envied, or destroyed. But if anyone had bothered to look deeper, they might have seen a different story. They might have noticed the sharp intelligence in her hazel eyes, the way she listened more than she spoke, the rare times her laughter bubbled out, a sound so pure it turned heads even in the loudest rooms. They might have realized that Lila's strength wasn't in being loud or dramatic, but in her ability to endure, to adapt, and to survive. Lila was 32 years old. She had grown up in Boston, the only child of a single mother who worked 2 jobs and still found time to teach her daughter about kindness and grit. Lila's mother, Ann Hart, never had much, but she gave Lila everything that mattered: honesty, warmth, and a belief that you could always start over if you had to. Lila learned early to make do, to fix torn clothes, to cook dinner from scraps, to smile through disappointment. She became an expert at hiding sadness, at pretending everything was fine even when it wasn't. It was a skill that would serve her well when she met Grant. Lila had always been ambitious, though she never flaunted it. She got herself through college on scholarships and part-time jobs, graduating near the top of her class in economics. She dreamed of working in nonprofit finance, helping others like her mother had done, making a difference in a world that sometimes felt stacked against women like them. After graduation, she took a job as an analyst at a charity foundation. The pay was modest, but she was happy. She rented a tiny apartment with creaky floors, kept a shelf full of secondhand books, and decorated with thrift store art. She met Grant at a fundraiser for children's hospitals. He was charming, magnetic, and he noticed her in a way few others ever had. At first, he seemed almost too good to be true. A man who could fill a room with laughter, who remembered the smallest details about her life, who brought her wildflowers from the corner store just because. When he asked her out, she felt like she was in a dream. For a while, it was perfect. But dreams have a way of turning, and Lila quickly discovered that Grant was not who he pretended to be. The first warning signs were small: a sharp comment about her plain dress at a party, a dismissive laugh when she shared her work struggles, a subtle pressure to quit her job and focus on being a wife. Grant, she realized, didn't want a partner. He wanted someone to orbit around him, to boost his ego, to never outshine or outsmart him. Still, she tried to make it work. She convinced herself that love was about compromise, that Grant's flaws were just signs of stress or ambition. When they got married in a lavish ceremony, Lila wore her mother's necklace as a reminder to stay grounded, even as the world spun dizzyingly around her. She told herself she was lucky, that she had everything she ever wanted. But loneliness crept in. Grant spent more and more time at the office, or at business dinners that stretched into the early hours. The apartment that once felt magical began to feel like a gilded cage. Lila's days blurred into a routine of errands, charity committees, and long, silent evenings waiting for a husband who rarely came home. When she found out she was pregnant, everything changed. For a moment she felt hope again, a chance to build a real family, to rewrite the story of her own childhood. She imagined the three of them together, laughter echoing through their apartment, a sense of belonging that had always eluded her. She told Grant the news one sunny morning, her hands trembling with excitement. His reaction was lukewarm at best. He said all the right things, but she could see it in his eyes, the fear, the disappointment, the resentment. He wanted a trophy wife, not a mother. Still, Lila tried to stay positive. She decorated the nursery herself, painted tiny clouds on the walls, read baby books late into the night. But Grant grew colder. The business trips multiplied. The phone calls grew shorter, the silences longer. When he started staying out late with his new assistant, Lila felt the old ache in her chest grow into something almost unbearable. She confronted him once, gently, asking if something was wrong. He laughed. "Don't be so sensitive, Lila. Maybe if you took better care of yourself, I wouldn't have to work so hard." She never brought it up again. But Lila was stronger than anyone realized. She hid her pain, showed up to every event with a practiced smile, and leaned into the one thing she had always known: resilience. When her mother passed away unexpectedly during her second trimester, Lila was alone in the world. She grieved quietly, holding her belly at night and whispering promises to her unborn child. "You'll never feel unloved. You'll never feel alone." She didn't tell anyone about the inheritance she received. She didn't tell Grant that her mother had quietly invested in stocks for years, turning pennies into millions. Lila put the money in a separate account under her maiden name, a secret shield in case she ever needed to protect herself and her child. It turned out she would need it much sooner than she thought. Now, standing in the center of that dazzling ballroom, every wound and every sacrifice was laid bare. But there was something new inside her, a spark that couldn't be extinguished. She wasn't just a pregnant wife, not anymore. She was a survivor, and soon the world would see just how dangerous a survivor can become. The City Hope Gala was more than just a party. It was the kind of event people in Lila's world spent months preparing for and years talking about afterward. It wasn't only about raising money for sick children or about the latest designer gowns. It was a public theater of power, a place where deals were whispered behind champagne glasses, fortunes were made and lost over a nod or a smile, and the most ruthless people in the city could put on masks and pretend to care. It was also, for Lila Hart, the setting for her most public humiliation, the night everything she'd carefully hidden was exposed. From the outside, the Regent Hotel looked like something out of a movie. White-gloved valets escorted Lamborghinis and Bentleys to their reserved places. Paparazzi crowded behind velvet ropes, shouting the names of anyone in a suit or a sequin dress. The ballroom itself was a world away from the reality Lila grew up in. Marble floors, 20-foot ceilings, dripping with crystal, and golden light spilling from a chandelier the size of a small car. Waiters moved silently, balancing trays of hors d'oeuvres, and everywhere you looked, someone was trying to impress someone else. Lila had never belonged here. Not really. Even when she was married to Grant, she always felt like a guest at her own life. It wasn't the wealth. She knew money as well as any of these people, thanks to her mother's secret portfolio. It was the rules she didn't understand. The way people talked without saying anything. The silent wars over who got to sit at which table, who wore what, whose smile was genuine and whose was a razor blade in disguise. She walked into the ballroom alone that night, aware of every pair of eyes turning toward her. She felt the stares on her belly first. Whispers rushed through the room like wind through dry leaves. Some women glanced away, embarrassed. Others stared openly, drinking in the scene, waiting for the drama to unfold. In the old days, Grant would have greeted her at the door, offering his arm, pulling her close for the cameras. But tonight, he was already at the center of the action, beaming at his own reflection in the eyes of a woman who wasn't his wife. The scene played out in slow motion. Grant's words, "Who'd want a pregnant woman?" hung over the crowd like a poisonous cloud. His mistress, Marissa, in that fire-engine red dress, clung to his arm and giggled. Lila stood motionless, fighting the urge to flee, feeling her heart pound in her chest so hard it almost drowned out the music. But even as the humiliation burned, a colder, calmer voice spoke inside her. "Remember this moment," it whispered. "Every sneer, every smirk, every person who looks down on you tonight, you'll show them all." The humiliation was public, but it wasn't private. In her mind, the memory of how she got here replayed itself in a dozen painful details. Just last week, she'd tried to talk to Grant. She told him she was scared. The pregnancy was getting harder. She felt alone. Instead of comfort, he gave her contempt. "This is what you wanted, Lila," he'd sneered, looking at her as if she were a stranger. "I didn't sign up to babysit a hormonal wife. I have a business to run." It was as if the life they'd built together, the long nights, the whispered dreams, even the little joys, meant nothing to him. She realized with growing horror that she had become invisible in her own marriage. He didn't even try to hide his affair. Everyone in their circle knew about Marissa, the new assistant at Grant's real estate firm. Lila had seen the way Marissa looked at her husband, the way she flinched when Lila entered a room. She'd watched Grant grow bolder, bringing Marissa to more and more events, ignoring the looks, daring anyone to challenge him. The betrayal was sharp, but the isolation was even worse. Lila's phone buzzed with empty texts from acquaintances. "Are you okay? Thinking of you." But no one came over. Her only true friend in that room, Julia, was stuck at her sister's wedding across the country. Lila was truly alone. Yet something strange happened in that moment. Instead of breaking, she found herself growing stronger. It was like watching herself from outside her own body. The shame faded, replaced by a simmering anger. She thought of her mother, how she'd survived so much worse, how she always said, "If you can't change the room, change yourself." It was then, in the middle of the glittering cage, that Adrian Westfield appeared. Adrian was everything Grant was not: composed, quietly powerful, and genuinely kind. He didn't flinch from Lila's vulnerability. Instead, he offered her his arm and a soft, steady look that told her she wasn't alone. For a second, Grant's smug confidence faltered. Whispers started up again, more frantic this time, as people tried to make sense of the new power dynamic forming before their eyes. Adrian guided Lila to a table at the front of the room, one reserved for VIPs, the place where the real decisions were made. As they sat, he leaned in and spoke quietly, just for her. "You don't have to stay and take this. But if you do, you'll show them all that you're stronger than anything they throw at you. I know your story, Lila. You have no idea what you're truly capable of." In that moment, something changed. Lila sat up straighter, shoulders back, chin high. The hurt was still there, but it was wrapped in something harder: resolve. She looked across the ballroom, locking eyes with Grant. He looked away first. She knew then that tonight wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of her fight. Betrayal has a taste. For Lila, it was metallic, bitter, clinging to the back of her throat every time she caught sight of Grant's hand resting on Marissa's hip. The rest of the room saw a power couple and his beautiful new date, but Lila knew the truth. Grant Benson was not the man he pretended to be. He was a master of masks, an actor with a perfectly rehearsed smile for the public and a razor-sharp sneer for those closest to him. And Marissa, she was not just a pretty accessory. She was the kind of woman who thrived on taking what belonged to someone else. Marissa Wallace had entered Grant's life like a summer storm, sudden, blinding, and a little bit dangerous. At 26, she was everything Lila wasn't: brash, ambitious, unapologetic about her desires. She'd grown up in Miami, the daughter of a nightclub owner, and had clawed her way to New York with nothing but confidence and an Instagram following. People called her a social climber, but she never cared. If anyone asked, she'd say she just wanted a piece of the world that never made space for girls like her. When she joined Grant's real estate firm, she set her sights on the top. And what better way to the penthouse than through the boss's heart? Except it was never about love. For Marissa, Grant was a means to an end. Invitations to elite parties, exclusive vacations, expensive gifts, and a shortcut to the city's most guarded circles. She liked the way people looked at her when she walked into a room on Grant's arm, part envy, part fear. She craved power almost as much as she craved attention. And she especially loved the thrill of being the woman who stole someone else's man, as if that made her the winner of some invisible, twisted game. Tonight was her victory lap. Marissa had planned every detail: the designer dress, the bold lipstick, the coy laughter. She wanted everyone to see her, to see Grant, and most importantly, to see Lila, pregnant and alone. She'd whispered cruel jokes in Grant's ear, loud enough for others to overhear. She really let herself go, didn't she? I guess some women just aren't cut out for this world. Her laughter, sharp as broken glass, sliced through Lila more than once. Grant, for his part, played along. He basked in the attention, letting Marissa dangle from his arm as if she were a trophy. He told himself he deserved this. After all, hadn't he worked hard for everything he had? Wasn't he entitled to a little fun, a little freedom? Lila had become a burden in his mind. Her needs, her worries, her growing belly. Reminders of a life he wasn't sure he wanted anymore. He'd changed over the years, bit by bit. At first, Lila chalked it up to stress. The real estate market was brutal, and Grant always wanted more. More money, more respect, more of everything. But then the ambition soured, turning into entitlement. He stopped asking Lila about her day. He criticized her clothes, her friends, even the food she cooked. When she told him about the baby, he smiled for the cameras, but in private he acted as if she'd sabotaged his future. His betrayal wasn't sudden. It was a slow poisoning. Each careless word and cold shoulder another drop in the glass. The affair with Marissa was just the final, public act of a drama that had been playing out for years behind closed doors. The worst part was that Lila blamed herself for a long time. She replayed every fight, every quiet night spent alone. Maybe if she'd been more glamorous. Maybe if she'd pushed harder to save their marriage. Maybe if she hadn't gotten pregnant at all. Guilt twisted inside her, wrapping around the love she once had for Grant and turning it into something ugly and sharp. But now, as she watched them perform for the room, something inside her snapped. She could see them for what they really were, a pair of actors in a play where no one truly wins. Marissa clung to Grant's arm, but her eyes kept darting around the room, checking for approval. Grant smiled, but his laugh was hollow, echoing through a ballroom filled with people who would abandon him the second his star faded. Lila suddenly felt sorry for them both. But pity was not her shield. Anger was. Every cruel joke Marissa made, every smug look Grant flashed, only fueled Lila's determination. If they wanted her to break down, to walk out, to disappear, they'd be disappointed. Lila had spent her life surviving. She'd grown up with nothing, made something of herself, and watched it almost all slip away. But she was still here, and she wasn't finished. That night, as the gala continued and the hours stretched on, Lila felt her pain harden into resolve. The humiliation had burned away something soft inside her, revealing a core of steel she didn't know she had. She started to pay attention, to notice the cracks in Grant's mask and the desperate flickers in Marissa's eyes. She realized that Grant and Marissa's world was built on lies and borrowed time. And the only way to truly win wasn't to stoop to their level. It was to rise above them, to become someone they could never touch or destroy. So as the music swelled and the night drew on, Lila made a quiet promise to herself and her unborn child. We will never let anyone make us feel small again. She left the ballroom not in defeat, but with her head held high, knowing this was only the beginning. Her story wasn't over, not even close. It was supposed to be a night that belonged to the city's best and brightest. But for Lila, the City Hope Gala had become a waking nightmare. Her heartbreak broadcast like a headline, her pain turned into gossip by people who barely knew her name. The humiliation didn't end with Grant's cruel words or Marissa's icy laughter. If anything, those were only the beginning. The cameras caught everything. Somewhere behind the sparkling towers of champagne glasses, a photographer had captured the exact moment Grant delivered his infamous line, "Who'd want a pregnant woman?" That image, Grant smirking, Marissa's lips curled into a smug grin, Lila standing stunned in her soft blue dress, hand instinctively guarding her stomach, was already spreading across social media. Within hours, it would be on gossip blogs and message boards, dissected and judged by strangers who'd never walked a mile in Lila's shoes. In the minutes after the outburst, the ballroom itself became a gauntlet. People who had once smiled at Lila now looked away, suddenly fascinated by their phones or the pattern of the carpet. The same women who had once invited her to charity luncheons now huddled together, whispering behind manicured hands. Men she'd worked with on committees, who'd complimented her grace and dedication, averted their eyes, pretending not to hear the insults echoing through the crowd. But nothing hurt more than the sound of Marissa's laughter as she pressed herself closer to Grant. It was a sharp, brittle sound meant for Lila, and everyone knew it. "Don't take it personally, darling," Marissa purred, loud enough for those around them to hear. "Some women just aren't meant for the spotlight. Some people just fade." Grant laughed, his hand resting on Marissa's waist, as if the two of them were in on a private joke. For a few seconds, Lila couldn't move. Her vision swam. It was as if every humiliation she'd ever endured was crowding in on her at once. Her mother's voice whispered in her mind, steadying her. "They can't take your dignity unless you give it to them." Still, her cheeks burned. Her hands shook. For the first time in years, she truly considered running. Out the grand doors, away from the city, away from everything that hurt. But she didn't run. Something inside her snapped into place, cold and clear as glass. Lila forced herself to breathe. She lifted her chin and looked out at the crowd. Some people, very few, offered sympathetic glances. One woman, a stranger with kind eyes, mouthed, "I'm sorry." But most people just watched, hungry for more drama. Lila realized in that moment that she was done living for their approval. She was done shrinking herself to make other people comfortable. She squared her shoulders and moved deeper into the crowd, every step slow and deliberate. If Grant and Marissa wanted her to break, they'd have to try harder. Meanwhile, Adrian Westfield watched the scene unfold with mounting disgust. He saw Grant's smugness, Marissa's cruelty, and the crowd's cowardice. Adrian wasn't just another wealthy guest, he was one of the city's most powerful and private billionaires, and he'd known Lila's family from years before. Seeing her suffer stirred something protective, and more. He'd come to the gala intending to make a discreet donation and disappear, but witnessing Lila's pain changed everything. He stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. Conversations faltered as he approached Lila. He offered his arm without hesitation. "Let's get some air," he said softly, the warmth in his voice unmistakable. For the first time all night, Lila felt safe. She accepted his arm, letting him lead her out onto the grand stone terrace overlooking the city lights. Outside, the noise faded. Lila leaned on the cool stone railing, her breath shaky but steadying. "I can't go back in there," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I feel like I'm going to shatter." Adrian didn't offer empty comfort. Instead, he spoke the truth. "They want to see you fall apart, Lila. That's what feeds them. But you don't have to give them what they want. You don't owe any of those people an explanation or an apology. You're stronger than this. I know you are." She looked at him, surprised by the conviction in his eyes. For a brief moment, she remembered what it felt like to be seen not as an ornament or a victim, but as a whole person. Back inside, the rumors were already spreading. People speculated about Adrian's connection to Lila. Grant, seeing Adrian at her side, felt a pang of something unfamiliar. Was it jealousy or fear? Marissa's smile faltered just a little. The humiliation was still raw, but in the cool night air, Lila found her resolve growing stronger. She realized she was done letting other people write her story. She would not let this public shaming define her. Adrian turned to her, his expression gentle but serious. "You're not alone, Lila, not anymore. If you want help or just someone to listen, I'm here. And if you decide you want to fight back, really fight, I know some very good lawyers." Lila managed a small smile. For the first time since Grant's betrayal, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of something better. She straightened, a new sense of determination settling over her. She would not hide, she would not cower. Her pain was real, but so was her strength. Inside the ballroom, the music played on. But outside, under the vast city sky, Lila Hart was starting to plan her comeback. That night, Lila's world felt impossibly small. The echo of Grant's cruel words followed her long after she left the glow of the gala, each syllable replaying in her mind like the chorus of a song she couldn't escape. She took a cab home, numb and exhausted, barely aware of the rain streaking the windows or the city lights flickering past. By the time she reached her apartment, every muscle in her body ached with the weight of humiliation and betrayal. Her phone kept buzzing, news alerts, social media notifications, even a few hollow apologies from people at the gala who claimed they'd had no idea what was happening. She turned it all off. Lila wanted silence, a chance to breathe without the world's opinions suffocating her. She locked the door, slipped off her shoes, and pressed her forehead to the cool wood. It was the first time all day she let herself cry. The tears came in waves. For months, she'd been holding everything inside. Her loneliness, her fear for the future, the ache of loving a man who barely looked at her anymore. Now, with no audience, she wept, gut-wrenching sobs that left her gasping for air. She clutched her belly, whispering apologies to her unborn child, promising that somehow, some way, things would get better. But in the darkness, hope felt impossible. She moved through her apartment like a ghost. The nursery, still unfinished, mocked her with its little pastel clouds and unopened boxes of baby clothes. She ran her hand along the crib she'd built herself, imagining a different life. A life where Grant had been the father he promised to be, a life where her family was whole. Instead, she was alone. The realization was crushing. Lila had always prided herself on being strong, on surviving anything the world threw her way. But tonight, she felt utterly lost. She wondered if maybe Grant had been right. Who would want her now? Pregnant, abandoned, her private misery splashed across the internet for everyone to judge. Every time she tried to sleep, her mind spun with anxious questions. What would people say at the charity foundation? Would they still want her on the board? Would anyone believe her side of the story? She pictured Grant and Marissa together, laughing over the spectacle they'd made of her. The anger twisted with grief until she felt physically ill. She tried to call her mother, forgetting for a moment that her mother was gone. The ache of that loss was its own kind of heartbreak. Lila sank to the kitchen floor, wrapped her arms around her knees, and sobbed until she could barely breathe. In the darkest hour of the night, something inside her shifted. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe it was desperation, but a tiny spark of defiance began to flicker. She thought of her mother's favorite saying, "Tough times don't last, but tough people do." The words sounded hollow at first, but the more she repeated them, the stronger she felt. Lila wiped her face, forced herself to stand, and went to the bathroom. She splashed cold water on her cheeks, stared at her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes were red, her face swollen, but there was something fierce in her gaze, a stubbornness Grant had always underestimated. She went to her desk, pulled out her mother's old leather notebook. She flipped through pages of advice, recipes, little doodles. Near the back, in shaky handwriting, her mother had written, "Never let anyone else decide your worth. You are more powerful than you think." Lila traced the words with her finger. She took a deep breath and started making a list. Not of her failures, but of everything she still had. Her health, her baby, her skills, her inheritance, and a handful of true friends who would support her no matter what. Just before dawn, Lila finally slept, curled up with a pillow and her mother's notebook clutched tight to her chest. Her dreams were haunted by memories of Grant, the good times and the bad. But somewhere in the blur, she saw herself standing tall, her child safe in her arms, the world no longer able to touch her. Morning brought no miracles, but it did bring clarity. Lila woke to the sound of rain tapping against her window and the first rays of pale gray light. The pain was still there, but it was no longer paralyzing. She forced herself out of bed, showered, dressed, and made a real breakfast for the first time in weeks. She needed to be strong, not just for herself, but for the tiny life growing inside her. As she ate, her phone buzzed again. A message from Adrian Westfield. "Just checking in. Let me know if you need anything. You're not alone." She stared at the screen, torn between gratitude and embarrassment. She didn't want anyone's pity. But she knew, deep down, that Adrian's kindness was genuine. He was the only person in her circle who had treated her with respect since the night of the gala. After breakfast, Lila set about putting her life back together, one small task at a time. She cleaned the apartment, started sorting through old clothes for donation, answered emails from the charity board. Every time she felt her resolve waver, she remembered her mother's words and held them close. Tough people last. By the afternoon, she'd made a decision. She would not be defined by what had happened to her. She would not let Grant or Marissa win. If she had to start over, she would. But she would do it on her own terms and for her child. There would be no more shrinking, no more silence. She sat at her computer, her hands shaking just a little, and typed the first draft of her resignation letter to the charity foundation. She wasn't running away. She was making room for something new, a life where she would never again accept less than she deserved. The night had been long, but the dawn, though faint, brought hope. Lila woke to a new day with a strange calm inside her, a sense of having reached the bottom and, somehow, survived. The world outside was gray and wet, rain streaming down the windows in steady sheets, but in her heart, a flicker of stubborn hope had survived the storm of the previous night. She moved with a purpose that felt new. This wasn't the Lila who accepted humiliation or let herself be defined by anyone else's cruelty. This was the Lila her mother had raised, the woman she'd become in the shadows of other people's spotlight. She was still shaken, still angry, but with every passing hour, the fear faded and the resolve grew. As she made breakfast, Lila rehearsed what she would say to Grant if she ever faced him again. The words came to her easily now. "You don't get to decide my value. I know who I am, and I know what I'm capable of." For so long, she'd hidden her strength, out of love, out of loyalty, out of a desperate wish for peace. But she was done hiding. The first thing she did that morning was call her lawyer. It was a quiet conversation, measured and precise. Lila asked about her options: divorce, custody, the protections she could set up for her unborn child. Her attorney was thorough, reassuring her that she wasn't as powerless as Grant had made her feel. "You have leverage," he told her. "A lot more than you think, and you have rights. Let's not forget that." The call ended, and Lila sat in silence for a moment, letting the truth sink in. For the first time in months, she was planning for her own future, not just surviving, but building something new. She spent the next few hours reviewing her mother's portfolio. Lila had always known there was wealth in her family, but she'd kept it a secret. It was her safety net, a hidden fortune built from years of smart investments. When her mother died, she left it all to Lila, but with one rule: use this only when you truly need it. Never let money become your identity. For a while, Lila had been content to let Grant believe she was just a middle-class wife with simple dreams. He never asked about her background, never wondered why she was so careful, why she never seemed worried about bills or emergencies. Now, she saw the wisdom in her mother's rule. She'd always thought love and honesty meant never keeping secrets. But sometimes, a secret is all that protects you from the wrong people. Today, she felt grateful for her mother's foresight. She transferred some funds, just enough to ensure her security and pay for the best legal team in the city. She scheduled a meeting with a financial advisor, determined to safeguard her assets. She would not let Grant or anyone else take away what she'd worked so hard to preserve. Just as she finished setting up her accounts, the doorbell rang. Lila hesitated, anxiety rising. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened the door, she found Adrian Westfield standing on the other side, holding a bag of pastries and 2 coffees. "I thought you could use a friend," he said simply. He was calm and gentle, but Lila could see the worry in his eyes. She let him in, grateful for the company. They sat at her kitchen table, sharing quiet conversation over breakfast. For the first time since the gala, Lila felt the tension ease. Adrian didn't push, didn't pry. He listened, really listened, as she told him the truth about her marriage, her fears, her grief, and her hopes for her child. "You know," Adrian said after a while, "when I first met you, I knew there was more to you than anyone else realized. You have a strength they can't touch. Don't let them steal it." She smiled, genuinely this time. "I don't want to be a victim anymore, Adrian. I want to start over. Not for Grant, not to prove anything to anyone, but for me and for my baby." Adrian nodded. "And you will. You have something Grant will never understand, a heart that can't be bought, a mind that can't be broken." It was then that Lila shared her secret. She told Adrian about her inheritance, about the life she'd hidden to protect herself. She explained how she'd lived modestly by choice, how she'd always wanted to know who loved her for herself, not her bank account. Adrian listened, never judging, never questioning her decisions. When she finished, he looked at her with admiration. "You're even more incredible than I thought. That afternoon, Lila called the charity foundation and delivered her resignation. She kept her tone professional, not giving any reasons, refusing to give Grant or Marissa the satisfaction of gossip. Instead, she sent private thank you notes to the board and her closest colleagues, people who had always supported her, even when they didn't know the full story. With each task, Lila felt lighter. The pain wasn't gone, but it was no longer controlling her. She made a list of everything she wanted to accomplish in the next month: finding a new place to live, setting up a nursery without memories of Grant, attending therapy, and building a new community around her. She was determined to move forward, one step at a time. That evening, as rain finally cleared, Lila took a walk in the small neighborhood park near her apartment. She felt her baby kick, a reminder that life was moving forward, no matter how hard things seemed. She stood under a blooming cherry tree, closed her eyes, and promised her child, "I will give you a life filled with love and safety. We will never let the past define us." Her secret, once a burden, was now her greatest weapon. The world had underestimated Lila Hart for the last time. She was no longer afraid. She was ready for the next chapter, whatever it would bring. A week after the gala, the world was already on to its next scandal. But Lila Hart's transformation was just beginning. If the night of the gala had been her lowest point, the days that followed became the foundation for a new life. A life built not on fear or shame, but on power and clarity. She woke up one morning, looked in the mirror, and didn't see the woman Grant had abandoned. She saw a survivor, a future mother, and someone worthy of her own loyalty. The first step in her transformation was small, almost symbolic. She changed her hair. It had always been soft, chestnut brown, worn loose or in a gentle bun, the kind of hair that said, "I'm not here to be noticed." This time, Lila marched into an uptown salon and asked for something bold, a sleek, sharp bob with golden highlights. As the scissors snipped away her old self, she watched her reflection shift and harden into someone new. The stylist spun her around, and the woman in the chair was unrecognizable, a woman with steel in her eyes, whose vulnerability was now armor. Next came her wardrobe. Lila donated most of her old clothes, dresses that hid her body, sweaters designed to help her disappear. In their place, she chose smart, structured pieces that celebrated her pregnancy without apologizing for it. She bought a tailored blazer that made her feel powerful, not just cute. She chose bold colors and clean lines, determined to enter every room with confidence. For years, she had dressed for Grant, for society, for safety. Now, she dressed for herself. But real transformation is about more than hair and clothes. Lila worked on her mindset too. Every morning, she practiced standing tall in front of the mirror, repeating her new mantra, "I am enough. My story is not over." She started therapy, diving deep into the wounds left by her marriage, the shame, the gaslighting, the way she'd learned to shrink herself for someone else's comfort. It was hard work, painful and slow. But with each session, the shame lost its grip and made room for something stronger: self-respect. She also began assembling her new team. With the money from her mother's inheritance, Lila hired the best legal representation in the city, not only for her divorce, but to pursue full custody of her child and to protect her financial interests from Grant's greed. Her lawyer was a tough, sharp woman who took no nonsense and treated Lila like an equal. Together, they mapped out a strategy: airtight prenup enforcement, asset protection, and a plan to expose Grant's financial mismanagement should he try to come after her money. Adrian Westfield played a quiet but crucial role. He introduced Lila to trusted business contacts, people who saw her not as a scandal, but as a potential partner. For the first time in years, Lila began to imagine a future not shaped by Grant's shadow, but by her own vision. She attended networking events as herself, not as Mrs. Benson. She spoke confidently about her skills in nonprofit finance, and before long, she was offered a consulting position at a foundation focused on supporting women and children. It was meaningful work, work that mattered to her, and it gave her life purpose beyond just surviving. But the most important part of Lila's transformation happened quietly, at home. She carved out a nursery in her new apartment, a bright room filled with sunlight, painted soft yellow, decorated with hand-painted stars and animals. She filled it with books, with hope, with everything she wished for her child's future. Each night, she would sit in the rocking chair, reading out loud, dreaming of the day her baby would arrive in a world where love was not conditional and strength was not hidden. Word began to travel through her old social circles. The rumors changed. "Have you seen Lila lately? She looks amazing. Did you hear she got a huge consulting contract? I heard she's working with Adrian Westfield now." Even those who'd snubbed her at the gala began to rethink their alliances. Her transformation became its own kind of legend, one whispered among the city's elite as a cautionary tale and an inspiration. She went from scandal to success, from victim to victor, and she did it all on her own terms. Grant, meanwhile, was reeling. At first, he tried to dismiss Lila's transformation as a phase. He even made a few attempts to contact her, mostly to save face in front of his peers. But Lila was firm, polite, and absolutely unmoved by his apologies. She knew the game now, knew that Grant only valued what he couldn't have, only respected power when it was used against him. Marissa fared no better. With the city buzzing about Lila's comeback, Marissa's own ambitions began to backfire. No one wanted to hire the woman who had so publicly bullied Grant's pregnant wife. Business associates withdrew invitations, and even Grant grew cold, blaming her for the PR nightmare. Marissa, so used to winning, found herself shut out. The final touch was subtle but powerful. Lila posted a photo on her social media, a simple image of her, hand on her belly, standing in the sunlight of her new apartment, with the caption, "New beginnings, no apologies." The likes and supportive comments flooded in, but the real victory was her own peace of mind. She didn't need the world's approval, she had her own. By the end of that week, Lila Hart was no longer the woman left behind at the gala. She was the woman everyone wished they could be, resilient, radiant, and absolutely unafraid of the future. The annual Midtown Women's Leadership Gala was never intended to be a battlefield, but that night it became the stage for a comeback so dazzling that even Lila's harshest critics could only watch in awe. It was the city's most talked-about event of the spring, a gathering of CEOs, philanthropists, politicians, and socialites, people who shaped opinion and policy with the flick of a pen or a single cutting remark. For the first time since her very public humiliation, Lila Hart was about to take center stage, not as a victim, but as a force of nature. Rumors about her return swirled for weeks. Some said she would never show her face again. Others speculated she'd appear in the background, quietly supporting some other woman's success. No one expected her to walk through those gilded doors, head held high, every inch the queen she was always meant to be. When Lila arrived, the effect was immediate. Every head in the lobby turned. She wore a tailored emerald dress that complemented her glow, her hair perfectly styled, her makeup subtle but fierce. A pair of simple diamond earrings sparkled as she moved, and her baby bump, now unmistakable, was embraced with confidence and grace. This was not a woman in hiding. This was a woman in command of her own story. At her side was Adrian Westfield, looking both protective and proud. The press snapped photo after photo, trying to capture the moment that felt less like a red carpet appearance and more like the rise of a legend. Even the event organizers, used to power players and influencers, paused to take in the sight. Lila greeted old acquaintances and former doubters with a genuine smile, unfazed by whispers or curious stares. Inside, the gala sparkled with possibility. Champagne flutes glinted in the light, string quartets played softly, and groups of powerful women chatted about new projects and old enemies. Lila moved through the crowd with purpose, connecting with women who'd once ignored her, now eager to be seen with the woman everyone was watching. She offered kindness where she once received scorn and paid attention to stories that were too often overlooked. The tension in the room crackled when Grant Benson and Marissa Wallace arrived. They were dressed for damage control. Grant in a carefully selected suit, Marissa in a desperate, over-the-top gown. Both carried the strained smiles of people hoping to salvage their reputations. For weeks, Grant had tried to win back public favor, but nothing worked. The city hadn't forgotten his cruelty, and Marissa's presence only reminded everyone of the scandal. As the evening reached its peak, Adrian quietly announced Lila's sponsorship of the gala's main scholarship initiative, a multi-million-dollar commitment funded through her mother's legacy. The room erupted in applause. Leela, invited to the stage, walked with a confidence that sent a clear message. This was not about revenge, but about leadership and giving back. But her true moment came later, during the panel discussion. Leela took the microphone, her voice steady and clear. She spoke not just about charity or business, but about survival and transformation. Sometimes life knocks you down in ways you never imagined. Sometimes the people you trust most show you their worst. But those moments are not the end. They are invitations to become someone stronger, someone who defines herself, not by her wounds, but by her choices. She didn't mention Grant or Marissa by name. She didn't have to. The entire city knew the story, and Lila's grace only made her power more obvious. The applause was thunderous. That's when Grant, red-faced and desperate, tried to save face. He approached Lila after her speech, forcing a smile for the cameras. "You look great, Lila. Maybe we should talk, for old time's sake." Marissa hung back, looking suddenly small. Lila met Grant's gaze with a calm, unwavering confidence. "There's nothing left to talk about," she replied. "But if you want to know what real strength looks like, pay attention tonight." As if on cue, Adrian joined her. But this time, he was not the only powerful ally by her side. The board chair announced that Marissa's contract with Grant's company had been terminated effective immediately, thanks to a majority vote from the new board of directors, led by Lila herself. The announcement landed like a thunderbolt. Marissa's face drained of color. The room erupted in a buzz of speculation. Grant was speechless, scrambling for words as Marissa stumbled away. Lila didn't gloat. She simply nodded, thanked the board for their faith, and reminded everyone that integrity matters in business and in life. For Lila, this public victory wasn't about humiliation or petty revenge. It was about reclaiming her voice and her agency. She stood tall, not just for herself, but for every woman who'd ever been underestimated, ignored, or betrayed. She showed the city that real power comes from within, and that sometimes the best way to win is to rise higher than anyone ever thought possible. That night, as she left the gala arm in arm with Adrian, Lila felt her baby kick. It was as if the future itself was applauding her, reminding her that this new chapter had only just begun. When the last of the champagne had been poured and the string quartet packed away their instruments, the Midtown Women's Leadership Gala slowly emptied into the warm spring night. Lila stood on the steps outside, taking in the city's pulse. 1,000 taxi horns, distant laughter, neon glowing against the inky sky. For the first time in months, she felt the world slow down. She felt, finally, at peace. Adrian Westfield lingered beside her, quietly letting the crowd filter past before speaking. "You did it, Leela," he said, his tone a mixture of pride and wonder. "You really did it." He looked at her as if she were the only person on earth, but it was more than admiration in his gaze. It was a recognition, a kindred spirit who understood what it meant to claw your way out of the dark and come out shining. Lila smiled, feeling her baby shift and stretch inside her. All the pain, humiliation, and heartbreak of the last months had been transformed into something almost holy: strength. She hadn't just survived Grant's betrayal or Marissa's cruelty. She had built something no scandal could ever tear down: her self-worth. As the last guests drove off, a few of the younger women from the gala gathered around Lila, eyes wide with admiration and hope. "How did you do it?" one asked quietly. "How did you stand up there and not let them break you?" Lila thought for a moment. She looked at the women, their youth, their vulnerability, their hunger for hope. Then she spoke, her voice low but resonant. "You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be unbreakable. You just have to decide that your worth isn't measured by anyone else. There's power in choosing yourself, even when it's terrifying, especially then." One woman wiped her eyes. "Were you scared?" "Every single day," Lila replied honestly. "But fear is just proof that you care about your future. Let it fuel you, not freeze you. And never ever let someone else's lack of vision define your possibilities." Another asked, "How did you forgive him?" Lila's answer was simple and unflinching. Forgiveness isn't about letting them off the hook. It's about letting go of the weight they put on you. It's about setting yourself free. She paused, letting her words settle. People will always try to reduce you to a mistake, a rumor, or a headline. That's not your truth. Your truth is what you do next. It's the story you write with your own hands. A A silence followed, one of those rare, electric silences where everything feels possible. The women around her stood a little taller, and even Adrian looked at her with something like awe. The news of Marissa's firing and Grant's downfall spread quickly in the days that followed. Where once Lila's name had been whispered in pity, now it was spoken with admiration. She was featured in business magazines and invited to speak at panels. Her consulting career flourished, but she never let the spotlight change her priorities. She built a new life for herself and her child, one filled with color and hope. Her apartment became a haven of laughter, music, and love. She surrounded herself with friends who respected her boundaries, colleagues who valued her mind, and mentors who challenged her to keep growing. Lila never forgot where she came from. She established a scholarship in her mother's name for young women with dreams but little means. She visited community centers, sharing her story, not as a fairy tale, but as a real, raw testimony to the power of self-respect and resilience. Grant tried to stage a comeback, but the world had moved on. His apologies, once devastating, now rang hollow. The board of directors he once controlled respected Lila's wisdom and her values. Marissa drifted from one failed PR gig to another, always searching for shortcuts but never finding the substance she envied in Lila. And Adrian? He became more than a friend, more than a business partner. Over months, their bond grew deeper. A partnership rooted in respect, trust, and a shared vision for the future. Together, they created projects that empowered women across the city, helping countless others reclaim their stories from shame and betrayal. The day Lila's daughter was born, she stood at the hospital window, holding her baby close and watching the sunrise pour gold across the city skyline. Tears slipped down her cheeks, not of sorrow, but of overwhelming joy and gratitude. She whispered, "You are not your past. You are hope. You are possibility. You are loved, no matter what." Years later, when her daughter asked about that infamous night at the gala, Lila would tell her the truth. Not about the cruelty, but about the courage. Not about the betrayal, but about the moment she realized she was stronger than any pain. Sometimes, she would say, life tries to write your ending for you, but you get to decide what comes next. You get to be the hero in your own story. As the city buzzed far below, Lila Hart finally understood. Happiness wasn't something you waited for or depended on others to provide. It was something you built, choice by choice, brick by brick, even from the rubble of heartbreak. Her legacy would not be survival alone, but the reminder that every woman, no matter how broken, could rise again, powerful, loved, and unstoppable. This was her final lesson. This was her true beginning. So the story has ended, and our wonderful friends, are you still here until now? If you are, then maybe there's something in this journey that's touched your heart in some way. I want us to pause and look at it together, just like two friends, seeing the lesson in Lila's story. Life isn't about never falling or never feeling pain. Sometimes what breaks us also awakens our greatest strength. Remember, no one else gets to write your ending. You do. As one heterodox saying goes, the wound is the place where the light enters you. When life tries to define you by your lowest moments, choose instead to define yourself by your next move, your courage, your hope. If Lila's story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel, and tell us in the comments what part of this story resonated most with you. Your story matters. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise.